Charizard was prized because of its popularity in the anime, Blastoise was cherished because of its viability competitively, and then Venusaur just kind of existed. So here's a Venusaur deck! Venusaur's ability lets it transfer as many grass energies per turn as you want to other Pokemon back and forth. This allowed it to abuse the Pokemon Center card, which removed all damage counters off of a Pokemon at the cost of discarding all of the energy on it. And because Venusaur can move all of the energy off, you can heal and then move them right back on there. This combo led to the VenuCenter archetype, in which you could just move all these grass energies around. The problem was there weren't very many good grass types that could utilize those grass energies. A lot of decks used Venomoth, some of them used Nidoking, but the one that I really thought was the most fun is Executor. So this build of VenuCenter is also centered around Executor and utilizes Scyther as a sponge. So let's look at all the cards in this build and get a little more in depth. So all of the Pokemon in this deck are going to come in threes. So up first is this Bulbasaur, 3 of those. It has 40 HP, which makes it kind of weak, but its attack can come in handy. We also have 3 Venusaurs. No Ivysaur in this deck. I like to use Pokemon Breeder a lot better. Helps speed up the deck a little more. 3 Execute, which also has that same Leech Seed attack that can come in handy against things like Mr. Mime and work out really well for this deck when it gets in a bind against those kinds. Executor is the card I really think is a lot of fun. That big explosion attack. You flip a coin for every grass energy attached to it. For each heads, you deal 20 damage. So you're not always dealing exact damage, but you can deal a lot based on your luck flipping coins. Scyther, with that free retreat, can be a good damage sponge. And you can also use it as an attacker. Because we're using grass energy in this deck, you can power up that slash attack pretty easily. And like I mentioned before, Pokemon Center is the big trainer for this deck. It lets you combo with Venusaur to heal all the damage off of any Pokemon you have with damage on them without having to worry about discarding any energy since you can move them around. The Pokemon Breeder in there to make sure you can get Venusaur on your bench and get that ability working as fast as possible. Item Finders in here so you can get those Pokemon Centers back. Use them over and over throughout the game. Never keep any solid damage on anything. Every deck from around this time needs draw power. That's why you've got your Professor Oaks and your Bills. Make sure you get the basics you need to fill up your bench. Because as you're playing this deck, you want to spread out your grass energies amongst your bench in case something gets gusted out and knocked out. You don't want to lose all of your grass energy at once. It also helps get the grass energy in your hand when you need them, as well as filling up your hand to use Computer Search. Computer Search helps a lot in these niche situations where you need a very specific card. Maybe you need just one more energy, or you need that Pokemon Breeder, or you have the Breeder in your hand and you need the Venusaur. It applies to all situations, really. Gust of Wind's in there for obvious reasons. You can pull out weaker stuff on the bench, especially using Venusaur's attack that does 60. You want to use that to pull out and get some basic knockouts. And then also with Executor, because it's not dealing exact damage, if you want to go for a less risky attack, then you want to pull out something that has less HP, definitely. Switch is in here to combo off of Scyther. You definitely don't want to be discarding any energy. That way you can keep them and move them around for Executor. Also, for getting rid of special conditions, you can use Switch and bring out a Scyther, and then use its free retreat to bring your active back out. 20 grass energy, this deck is very susceptible to energy removal and super energy removal because the whole strategy focuses around keeping those energy and moving them around where you need them. And this deck does not run energy retrieval. If you're running into a lot of energy removals playing this deck, one way to combat that is to use Lass, which will let you discard all of those energy removal cards from your opponent's hand before they can use them, hopefully. It's also very noticeable and worth noting that this deck does not use plus power. It can come in really handy, especially since you always want to aim for that 70 HP area to help knock out the big basics. I just didn't want this build to be too overcrowded, so I left that out. Another great addition to this deck would be Ditto, because you can move all of the energy you want onto Ditto, and its ability makes those energy whatever you want to make them. So it can copy the attacks of your opponent's active, with as many energy as you need that you transfer over using Venusaur's power. Using this Ditto could actually give you an advantage when you're in a really bad matchup against something like Blastoise, where you can get off a big attack faster than they can because you have that energy transfer advantage. And because I don't use energy retrieval in this deck, another addition you could make as an alternative is the Black Star Mewtwo promo. A lot of people forget that its first attack lets you get any energy you want out of discard to attach to that Mewtwo, and they don't have to be psychic energy. So you can actually get those energy out of discard onto Mewtwo and move them next turn. And like I said earlier, you want to stagger your energy across everything that's on your bench. That way you don't lose all of your energy off of one knockout. And that's another problem with this deck, is when you're powering up an Executor to get off this huge attack, the damage isn't fixed, so you're not sure how much damage you're actually going to deal, which is another reason I didn't use plus power. You don't want to throw down a plus power when you have the possibility of dealing 0 damage. But once you attack with Executor, you don't have the option of moving all of the energy off after the attack, so if it gets knocked out, you're losing all of the energy that you used for your big explosion. This is where you have to be super strategic with your Pokemon centers, so that you're making sure that Executor doesn't take a full 80 damage. You want to keep it away from that and try to swap in your Scythers to absorb some more of that damage. If you can get this setup going, then hopefully your opponent isn't dealing a full 80 damage. Not a lot of decks really could at the time, so it does have that going for it. So once you're set up, you get 40, 50 damage on Executor. You use Venusaur's power to move all of the energy off. Use Pokemon Center to remove all damage counters. Use Venusaur's ability again to move as much energy back as you need to before you attack. Everything in this deck is weak to fire, therefore it has a really bad matchup against fire types. Thankfully, there weren't very many in the metagame. The only one you would really run into is Magmar. Magmar is really problematic for this deck, not only dealing double damage, but it's also a really good setter for special conditions, which would shut down Venusaur's ability. And this deck is also very slow. It takes a little while to set up, and it can be completely ruined during setup with energy removals. So it does get outsped a lot by stuff like Haymaker, where your Bulbasaurs are getting knocked out before you can evolve them. But one great matchup that this Venusaur build does have is against Damage Swap decks. Damage Swap can shut down a lot of decks like this because of that Mr. Mime coming out on the field. Mr. Mime's ability blocks all damage from happening if it's 30 or higher. So if you've got something set up like a Blastoise or an Articuno or Charizard that can only deal damage that's high, then it completely shuts down that deck. One thing that this Venusaur build has going for it is you can swap out an Execute or a Bulbasaur and use Leech Seed. By using Leech Seed, you're dealing 20 damage, so it's a 2-hit KO on Mr. Mime. Also, Mr. Mime's attack has a base of 10 that builds off of whatever damage counter you already have. So when you use Leech Seed, you're healing off that 10 damage and making that Mr. Mime pretty much useless. Now, they can always swap in a Chansey, in which case you can go to a Venusaur, which can 2-hit KO. All the while, you're moving energy around with Venusaur's ability and comboing those Pokemon Centers to heal off all the damage counters you have. And because Damage Swap is also a deck that takes a while to get set up and is really strong in the late game, that's what gives VenuCenter a really good matchup, is because by the time that Damage Swap is set up, you already have a setup that's basically counter to what they're doing. All in all, I wouldn't say that this deck is great. It got outsped by almost everything that was in the metagame, which really hurt it. But it is really fun to use. I really like grass and bug types. Those are my favorite types. And there's not much in the base set era to actually build around, so this is probably the best option for using those cards. Let me know in the comments what your variations for this deck are, and let me know how shit my build is. And let me know what kind of decks you would like to see me analyze in the future. Till next time, bye!